The summer of 2025 brought not warmth, but a sense of foreboding that crept across Canada like a cold front. Instead of the usual optimism that comes with long days and blue skies, there was a growing unease in the air, a feeling that something was about to change, and not for the better. The shock came swiftly, sending a chill through the heart of the Canadian economy. Streets that once bustled with shoppers and laughter now echoed with silence, as businesses shuttered their doors and communities braced for impact. The Trump administration's sudden 35% tariff on Canadian goods landed like a thunderclap. It was more than a policy shift. It felt like an act of economic aggression, a move that rattled the nation's confidence and left leaders scrambling for answers overnight. News of the tariff spread rapidly, sending anxiety rippling from the glass towers of Toronto's financial core to the weathered docks of Newfoundland's fishing villages. No corner of the country was untouched by the uncertainty. Factories in Ontario and Quebec, once the pride of their communities and symbols of Canadian resilience, began to close their doors. Workers who had spent decades on the line found themselves packing up their belongings, unsure of what the future would hold for their families and towns. The tariff struck indiscriminately, undermining the Canadian dream of seamless North American trade. Layoffs mounted, and the lines at job centers grew longer by the day. The sense of security that had defined Canadian life began to erode. As jobs disappeared, the social fabric of entire regions began to unravel. Playgrounds fell silent, community centers closed, and families faced the painful decision to leave behind the only homes they'd ever known. The crisis exposed Canada's deep vulnerability, its prosperity built on a single, now fractured relationship. Business owners watched their savings dwindle, and exporters stared at empty shipping yards, wondering if their livelihoods would ever recover. As the economic chill deepened, a sense of betrayal replaced decades of trust in the U.S. The partnership that had once seemed unbreakable now felt fragile, and Canadians questioned whether they could ever rely on their southern neighbor again. Canada faced a harsh new reality, alone, unprepared, and forced to confront its dependence on its southern neighbor. The chill of the tariff winter was more than economic, it was a test of national resolve, and a moment that would shape the country's future for years to come. The shock didn't stop at the factories. It rippled through every sector, sending waves of uncertainty and hardship across the country. What began as a single blow to manufacturing quickly became a crisis that touched every corner of Canadian life, from bustling cities to quiet rural towns. In British Columbia, sawmills fell silent, their machines gathering dust as orders dried up. Timber piled up unsold in lumber yards, a stark reminder of lost opportunity. For thousands of workers and their families, the sudden loss of jobs meant not just financial strain, but a deep sense of uncertainty about the future. Prairie farmers watched helplessly as their crops spoiled in the fields, cut off from their biggest market by an insurmountable tariff wall. Silos stood abandoned, and the fruits of a year's hard work went to waste. The impact was not just economic, it was personal, as generations of farming families faced the possibility of losing their land. Small businesses across Canada faced soaring costs and shrinking customer bases as layoffs spread. Shop owners who once knew every customer by name now struggled to keep their doors open, watching their communities change before their eyes. Main streets emptied, and local shops struggled to survive. Once vibrant town centers became eerily quiet, with for-lease signs replacing the familiar storefronts that had anchored neighborhoods for decades. The crisis was everywhere. Hardware stores, restaurants, and retailers all faced impossible choices. Owners agonized over layoffs, reduced hours, and the fear that their life's work might disappear overnight. The tariff was a wrecking ball, smashing the intricate web of Canada's economy. Supply chains that once hummed with activity ground to a halt, and the ripple effects reached far beyond the initial industry's hit. No sector was spared. From auto parts in Windsor to seafood in the Maritimes, every region felt the sting. Factories and processing plants that had been the lifeblood of their communities now stood idle, their workers left wondering what would come next. The interconnectedness of the economy became painfully clear. When one link broke, the entire chain suffered. Workers, suppliers, and families all felt the consequences as empty shelves and idle docks became the new normal. One act of protectionism had triggered a nationwide domino effect, toppling businesses and shattering lives. The story of Main Street became a cautionary tale of how quickly prosperity can unravel when the ties that bind an economy are suddenly cut. For generations, Canada's prosperity was tied to the United States, its largest trading partner and closest ally. This relationship brought wealth, but also a quiet, growing dependency. Trade agreements like NAFTA and USMCA deepened the integration, making Canada more vulnerable to US policy shifts. Three-quarters of Canadian exports went south, creating a dangerous imbalance. The 2025 tariff wasn't just a dispute, it was a systemic shock that exposed the fragility of Canada's economic foundation. The crisis forced a painful reckoning. Canada had become a junior partner, unprepared for sudden hostility. The myth of a special, equal partnership evaporated overnight. Canadians now faced the reality of over-reliance on a single, unpredictable neighbor. The country was left exposed, its identity and strategy in urgent need of rethinking. In Ottawa, the tariff crisis triggered not just economic turmoil but a wave of political chaos that swept through the capital. The city, long accustomed to stability, suddenly found itself at the epicenter of a national emergency, with every decision carrying enormous consequences for millions of Canadians. Prime Minister Mark Carney, newly in office and still finding his footing, faced mounting pressure from all sides, opposition attacks in Parliament, urgent demands from provincial premiers, and a public desperate for answers as uncertainty gripped the nation. The media hounded him for solutions, while his own cabinet grew restless. The government scrambled to negotiate with Washington, dispatching envoys and making urgent calls, but found only closed doors and frosty receptions. The White House, preoccupied with its own crises, offered little hope. Financial aid packages, hastily assembled and announced with fanfare, offered little comfort as layoffs spread from coast to coast. Factories shuttered, small businesses faltered, and families faced an uncertain future. The old playbook, quiet diplomacy and reliance on the US, was suddenly obsolete. Decades of trust and partnership seemed to evaporate overnight, leaving officials scrambling for alternatives. Canada urgently needed new options. Emergency meetings stretched late into the night as ministers debated bold moves and weighed the risks of uncharted territory. Diplomats fanned out worldwide, seeking new markets and alliances. Trade representatives landed in distant capitals, hoping to forge deals that could soften the blow at home. The crisis shattered decades of foreign policy consensus, forcing a global pivot. Long-held assumptions were questioned, and the nation's place in the world was suddenly up for debate. A once unthinkable idea gained traction, joining the BRICS bloc. For the first time, Canada considered aligning itself with new partners, seeking strength in numbers beyond its traditional allies. If the US door was closed, Canada had to find new ones to open. The search for opportunity became a race against time, with the nation's future hanging in the balance. The search for a lifeline was now a search for a new identity on the world stage, a test of resilience, adaptability, and the courage to chart a new course in uncertain times. BRICS, once a loose forum of emerging economies, had quietly become a powerful global force. Its expansion to include Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia boosted its economic and demographic clout. Now representing over 40% of the world's population and 44% of global GDP, BRICS was attracting dozens of new suitors. The bloc's push for an alternative financial system, bypassing the US dollar and Western institutions, was a direct challenge to American dominance. Ironically, US trade aggression only fueled BRICS's momentum, drawing more countries into its orbit. What began as a talking shop was now a formidable alliance, offering a real alternative to the Western-led order. For countries like Canada, BRICS represented both an opportunity and a profound dilemma. The idea of joining BRICS ignited a fierce national debate. Pragmatists, led by Prime Minister Carney, and business leaders, argued Canada had no choice but to act in its own interest. For them, BRICS was a path to economic survival and strategic autonomy, not an ideological shift. Supporters saw it as a bold move to diversify and escape the shadow of the US. Critics, however, warned of betraying Canada's democratic values by aligning with authoritarian regimes. They questioned the moral and practical costs, fearing Canada would have little influence and risk US retaliation. For opponents, joining BRICS was a reckless gamble, trading one dependency for another, with even greater risks. The nation was split between pragmatism and principle, with no easy answers. The BRICS debate reached every corner of Canada. For laid-off workers and struggling farmers, new markets offered hope and a lifeline. Business owners saw BRICS as a chance to rebuild shattered supply chains. For many, economic survival outweighed distant concerns about geopolitics. But others recoiled at the idea of aligning with autocratic states like Russia and China. Human rights advocates and students saw it as a betrayal of Canadian values. Retired diplomats warned of long-term risks, abandoning democratic allies for uncertain gains. The nation was deeply divided, torn between immediate needs and its moral compass. Canada now stands at a crossroads that will define its future. The choice is stark: cling to the old alliance with the US, risking continued vulnerability, or pivot toward BRICS and embrace uncertainty. This isn't just about trade, it's about national identity and values. Is Canada a North American nation, or a global actor ready for new alliances? The decision will shape Canada's economy, security, and moral standing for generations. Joining BRICS could mean economic renewal, but at the cost of alienating traditional allies. Staying the course risks isolation if US relations worsen. Whatever path is chosen, Canada will be forever changed. The weight of this moment felt by every Canadian contemplating the nation's future.